that, follow that. It's an absolute privilege to be here with all of you and be inspired by your passion and your integrity. So thank you to the World Community Development Conference for having me. In the few minutes that I have, I want to say a few words about the critical importance of community development to human rights, but also how human rights-based approaches and human rights can inform community development based really on those principles of participation and accountability. I want to go back to the very first principles, as Virginia did. As we all know, human rights are, in essence, about holding power to account against a collectively agreed set of fundamental standards below which we deem society and individual circumstances cannot and should not ever fall. And these are standards based on the principle of human dignity and ensuring that we can all live free from fear and free from want. And they enshrine, for example, the right to an adequate standard of living, to health, to housing, freedom from discrimination and violence, and to participate in society through freedom of speech and assembly and the right to vote. And as human rights have evolved over the last 70 years since the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's been increasingly recognised that the rights themselves, as well as their implementation and their realisation in practice, must be much more responsive to people's real life experience. So when, for example, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities was drafted in the early 2000s, the message from disabled people was clear: nothing about us without us. And this principle of participation, and that those whose rights are affected are the real drivers of change and need to be at the heart of power and the heart of decision making, which really I think is inherent to you in community development field, is increasingly better understood and put into practice by the more traditional, legally grounded human rights community, and in small pockets by state actors too. But the scale and the ambition of this rights-based, community-led approach to the realisation of rights is really yet to come to fruition. Now, much of the power of human rights comes from the fact that they are legally binding standards signed up to by states in international law and often enforceable through countries' own constitutions and legal national law. Yet, to my mind, for human rights to be truly powerful in transforming communities and societies, we must broaden our understanding of them beyond a narrow legal and political accountability lens. And this is because human rights should not and cannot only live in the committee rooms in Geneva, the UN, or courtrooms of different regions and countries around the world. For human rights to have meaning, they really do have to live and breathe, and in the well-known words of Eleanor Roosevelt, one of the architects of the modern-day human rights system, live in small places close to home. They have to have meaning in schools, in workplaces, in hospitals, in homes, and in communities. So in the 70 years since the signing of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we've seen this whole architecture build up around the promotion and protection of human rights. An array of treaties and laws, regional treaties, UN mechanisms and procedures, state-level protection of rights through both institution and laws and national human rights institutions like from where I come. Yet, despite all of these laws, all of these institutions, which are, of course, vitally important and necessary, we know that people's rights aren't met in practice. All of this infrastructure is completely insufficient without work on the ground to realise people's rights in practice. We've got stark inequalities globally and nationally: conflict, forced migration, prejudice, fueled discrimination and intolerance. And with all of this, a space has opened up in countries across the world for populist politicians to appeal to the millions who feel forgotten, who are left behind and who are unrepresented. And in too many places, this is being done not by committing to a rights-respecting society where everyone is equal and entitled to dignity, but instead by disassociating from these values. It's being done by unfairly pushing the blame for society's ills onto people who are already experiencing poverty, who cannot find work, who are willing to cross continents to escape war, tyranny, and extreme poverty. And also by disassociating and pushing blame on faraway supranational institutions that are there really to guard against these failures of state responsibility and the mistakes that have been made in the past. And meanwhile, I think we need to ask ourselves, where has the voice of human rights and the principles of equality and dignity, freedom and respect been to counter all of this? And I think we in the human rights legal community from which I come must challenge ourselves. Have human rights been in too many ways too far removed from the communities where we need them to be? Because if human rights and their values and their ultimate power in holding states accountable for their action or inaction are to thrive and to guide our societies to meet the real needs of people, then people across the globe need to have true ownership of their rights. And you, as community development practitioners, are absolutely critical in this. Because we know that where people know their rights and can claim their human rights with confidence, it can be transformative. It's empowering to the individuals and the communities involved, and it turns their needs and their demands for housing or a healthy living environment or food or to live supported in the community that may otherwise feel like charity or favour or kindness to matters of entitlement and matters of obligation. And critically, human rights are then transformative to the power dynamics that exist between individuals as rights holders and those in power, duty bearers. So human rights provide essentially an agreed set of standards and outcomes as the focal point for collaborative and collective action. They're the pre-agreed common ground that can bring everyone around the table on a more equal footing. In the work of the Scottish Human Rights Commission, I've seen this happen in many settings. I've seen it happen when residents and families in a care home who wanted to challenge policies restricting their freedom. I've seen it with a group of single-parent mothers raising issues around their lack of access to services. And I've seen it with a group of tenants raising issues of their inadequate housing, which wasn't meeting their needs. And in this last project that I mentioned, the Scottish Human Rights Commission, working with a tenants' participation organisation and civil society organisation, Participation in the Practice of Rights, supported residents to recognise their right to adequate housing and to use indicators defined by them to monitor whether progress was being made in addressing problems of damp, vermin and other habitability standards. And this rights-based approach to community development has been as successful as it has challenging. And I'm delighted that later today, some much admired residents and colleagues from that project will be running a session to share the lessons and insights from that work. So if you want to learn more about a rights-based approach and practice, please do head to their workshop and learn about that Housing Rights and Practice project, which I don't have time to go into here. So in summary, my key message is this. In our ambition and our work towards building stronger societies that are more equal, where people can flourish and no one is left behind, human rights are there to be harnessed by communities, to empower and frame their needs, and to bring others around the table to come up with shared solutions. And in doing this, as well as putting people at the heart of decision-making and at the heart of action and playing a role in improving lives, it will also help to breathe new life into human rights themselves, protecting the standards against erosion, against regression by political actors who across the globe are seeking to undermine them. And human rights can then have meaning where they belong most, in people's everyday lives, in their communities and in their homes. Thank you.